Only 17 kilometers long, the border between Russia and North Korea once stood as a frozen and forgotten frontier buried beneath decades of isolation. For years, this narrow strip of land remained little more than a geopolitical afterthought at the edge of Northeast Asia. But in 2026, everything changed. The construction of the first-ever road bridge between Russia and North Korea marked a historic turning point. What had once been an aging railway connection suddenly evolved into a massive logistical corridor capable of reshaping the balance of power in the region. With the capacity to handle hundreds of trucks and thousands of people every single day, the bridge is expected to transport millions of tons of fuel, industrial goods, and food supplies directly into North Korea. But this is about far more than trade. Every convoy crossing this bridge weakens the effectiveness of Western sanctions while drawing Moscow and Pyongyang into an increasingly powerful strategic alliance. And with every truck that rolls across the border, the geopolitical map of Northeast Asia shifts a little further. But this raises a critical question. Why did two neighboring countries wait more than half a century to build a direct road connection? What changed so dramatically after the war in Ukraine that Vladimir Putin and Jong suddenly decided to deepen their partnership? And behind this massive concrete structure, what larger geopolitical ambitions are quietly taking shape? The answer lies in one of the most important strategic realignments of the modern era. The new golden age of the Russia-North Korea alliance. The growing partnership between Russia and North Korea cannot be explained through ordinary diplomatic language. This is no longer simple cooperation. It is a survival alliance built on mutual necessity. For Moscow, the prolonged war in Ukraine and the crushing weight of Western sanctions created an urgent need for reliable partners operating outside the Western financial and political system. North Korea became one of the most valuable. Over the course of decades, Pyongyang built a massive military-industrial complex capable of producing enormous quantities of artillery shells, rockets, and ballistic missile systems. Today, millions of rounds of ammunition reportedly flow across the border into Russia, helping sustain Moscow's battlefield firepower at a time when ammunition consumption has reached extraordinary levels. At the same time, thousands of North Korean laborers continue working across Russia's Far East, filling severe labor shortages in some of the country's most remote regions. In return, North Korea receives exactly what it desperately needs: energy, food security, investment, and perhaps most importantly, access to advanced Russian technology. Recent developments in North Korea's reconnaissance satellite program and submarine capabilities have fueled growing speculation that Russian aerospace and military expertise is playing an increasingly important role behind the scenes. For both countries, the partnership has become strategically indispensable. But if this alliance is truly so important, why did they spend more than 67 years relying on a single railway bridge built in 1959? The answer lies in North Korea's long-standing obsession with isolation and security. For decades, Pyongyang believed that the more isolated the country remained, the safer the regime would become. Railways were easy to monitor, tightly controlled, and predictable. Road transport, however, represented something far more dangerous. Thousands of civilian trucks moving freely across the border would inevitably carry not only goods, but also information, outside influence, and foreign culture deep into North Korea itself. For years, a road bridge was considered a national security nightmare. Russia, meanwhile, had little reason to prioritize infrastructure projects in its sparsely populated Far East. But the war in Ukraine changed everything. As Western sanctions closed off major economic channels, Moscow was forced to pivot toward Asia at unprecedented speed. The sheer volume of military supplies moving between Russia and North Korea eventually overwhelmed the old railway system. A faster, more flexible transportation route became essential. And in 2026, the answer finally arrived. The new road bridge represents far more than infrastructure. It symbolizes a historic shift in North Korea's strategic thinking. For the first time in decades, Pyongyang appears willing to accept greater security risks in exchange for the economic and military protection offered by Russia. The strategic choke point of Northeast Asia. Looking at the map, many people see the Russia-North Korea border as an insignificant line barely visible on the edge of the continent. But geopolitical strategists see something entirely different. They see one of the most strategically valuable choke points in Northeast Asia. At the center of this region flows the Tumun River. Originating from the sacred Baekdu mountain revered in Korean history and culture, the river stretches more than 500 kilometers before reaching the Sea of Japan. Along its path, it forms the natural border separating Russia, China, and North Korea. And near its mouth lies one of the most sensitive geopolitical intersections on Earth. Standing near this narrow corridor, it is possible to see Chinese border posts, North Korean fences, and Russian military watchtowers all within sight of one another. This tiny strip of land effectively blocks China's direct access to the Sea of Japan. And that makes it enormously valuable. On the Russian side lies Primorsky Krai, home to critical infrastructure connected to the Trans-Siberian Railway and Russia's Pacific Fleet. Despite its harsh climate and sparse population, the region gives Moscow strategic access to the Pacific Ocean while allowing Russia to closely monitor naval activity from Japan, South Korea, and the United States. Across the river sits North Korea's Rason Special Economic Zone. And unlike many Russian ports in the Far East, Rason remains ice-free throughout the winter. That alone makes it extraordinarily valuable. For years, Russia invested heavily in rail connections and port infrastructure linking its Far East to Rason. But the new road bridge could unlock the region's full logistical potential. Oil, coal, industrial goods, and potentially military supplies may soon move through this corridor with far greater speed and efficiency. Most importantly, this route allows Russia and North Korea to exchange goods directly without relying on any third country. In modern geopolitical conflicts, that level of logistical independence is priceless. Breaking free from China's shadow. Yet perhaps the most important consequence of this bridge has little to do with Russia. It has everything to do with China. For decades, North Korea's economy remained overwhelmingly dependent on Beijing. Most of the country's foreign trade passed through the Chinese border city of Dandong. From food and fuel to electronics and industrial supplies, Pyongyang relied heavily on Chinese economic support. But that dependence came at a cost. North Korea never wanted to become completely subordinate to Beijing. Chinese influence over Pyongyang gave Beijing enormous leverage in regional negotiations with both Washington and Seoul. The new Russia connection changes that equation. By strengthening economic ties with Moscow, North Korea is creating an alternative lifeline beyond Chinese control. If Beijing attempts to pressure Pyongyang economically in the future, North Korea may now possess another powerful strategic partner capable of providing trade, investment, labor opportunities, and military cooperation. In many ways, the bridge represents Kim Jong-un's attempt to rebalance power between two giant neighbors. And that may ultimately be the most significant geopolitical consequence of all. The 19th century origins of a 17-kilometer border. The existence of this tiny border is not an accident of geography. It is the result of one of the most aggressive geopolitical maneuvers of the 19th century. Before 1860, Russia did not even share a border with Korea. At the time, Qing China controlled the entire region surrounding the Tumen River and maintained direct access to the Sea of Japan. But during the chaos of the Opium Wars and internal rebellions that weakened the Qing dynasty, the Russian Empire seized its opportunity. Acting as a so-called mediator between China and the Western powers, Russia pressured the Qing government into signing the Convention of Beijing in 1860. Without firing a single shot, Russia annexed vast territories in outer Manchuria. The acquisition gave Moscow access to the Pacific coast and eventually allowed the creation of Vladivostok, the future headquarters of Russia's Pacific Fleet. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was geographical. Russia's territorial expansion cut directly along the eastern side of the Tumen River, permanently blocking China from reaching the Sea of Japan. At the same time, it created the tiny 17-kilometer border with Korea that still exists today. More than a century later, that narrow strip of land has once again become one of the most important strategic corridors in Asia. And as the new bridge begins operation, the entire balance of power in Northeast Asia may begin shifting once again. Thank you for watching the video to the end. If you found the analysis in this video helpful in understanding the currency wars, geopolitics, and power struggles silently operating in the world, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more content. And now, I'd love to hear your perspective.